You know he had a hat-trick on the weekend.
I thought you done what? I thought you were not interested when he goes to Saudi.
I'm not, but...
You gave a great speech about that on the pod a few weeks back.
You've jumped in before I've made my point here, Dave. That's the trouble.
But that's just that's the whole podcast, Ollie. Ollie talks just as picking up steam winter times. Sure, you're allowed. Are you allowed in the UK if you murder someone in another country?
I don't know. You might be.
Hello and welcome along to Not Another Sports Pod, episode 36 with myself, David, and Mr. Oliver Wilson. Ollie, no Premier League action this week, but there's plenty to talk about. I want to go through the FA Cup and what is pretty intriguing last 8 draw. I want to preview the Champions League and Europa League in midweek. We've got to talk Ruben Amarim and Manchester United and just how that continues to unravel. I want to lean on La Liga, seeing as I'm out in Spain at the moment, and talk about the La Liga title race. I also want to talk about rule changes in the sport. There's been a new rule change involving goalkeepers, which I believe is going to come into force next season. Gerard Piqué has also got some ideas about how to switch the sport. And I believe North Korea are finally showing Premier League action. So lots of football, Ollie, and I'm sure you've got a... Ollie Wilson is crossing his fingers. He's hoping that North Korea shows.
It's the news that we've all waited for. Yeah, the Premier League going to North Korea is probably going to be one of the biggest political moves. The joining of North and South Korea is just on the horizon now that they'll be able to sit down and watch the success stories of sides like Brighton and Brentford and inspire the North Korean nation to remove its archaic dictatorship ways, and it will all be because of the Premier League, I'm sure. I mean... Dave, what are we doing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you're allowed to be
what are we doing here?
I don't think you're going to be a Tottenham fan in North Korea, most probably.
Do you think we see an influx? Let's go straight into this. Do you think we see an influx of North Korean players at any time soon into the Premier League? Because obviously we know that like North Korea have played at World Cups before. I think the last one might have been the 2002 World Cup, where after North Korea had played, some of their players went missing. Basically didn't make the return flight home because they tried to run for freedom, I think it was. And but we also know that the impact of like Heung-min Son from South Korea and how big that's grown the game and grown South Korean footballers' success in the Premier League. The fact that they have TV broadcasts where they put a picture of Heung-min Son's face in the top corner of the screen if he's on the pitch, because that way people flicking through the channels will go, he's on the pitch, I'll watch. And as soon as he gets taken off, viewership drops massively because they don't care about watching the game. They just want to watch Heung-min Son, which I think is fantastic. Do we see North Korea trying to get a player brought into the Premier League? Because then they can also cut the clips around the Premier League in the same way there was apparently a propaganda video created which showed North Korea winning that World Cup, that last World Cup that they played in, and like beating Brazil in the final and stuff like that. Do you think we then see a North Korean player put in the Premier League so then they can cut the clips around him? And if he, say, joins Brentford, do Brentford, to keep the propaganda going, get invited to North Korea to celebrate their Premier League title victory thanks to fill in the blank of North Korean player name here or something like that? I mean, it does open up a world of possibilities.
You're leaning on the comedic edge to all this, but the reality is the sport has very few, if any, morals. And there's 26 million people in North Korea. That's an audience capture. That's an audience share. Don't think there isn't an exec somewhere that is just running the numbers in his head. So, yeah, it can happen. Of course it can happen. And I'm not even joking. I mean, the minute someone thinks at the top of football they can make some money by bringing someone from North Korea to the Premier League or investing in North Korean academies, it will happen. So, yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I mean, Russia, Saudi Arabia, who knows, Ollie? It's anything could happen, mate. Anything could happen. And, you know, Is there a country you wouldn't work in? You know, if you were
North
offered
Korea would be
a
pretty
commentary
high
job.
on it, yeah.
Say again?
North Korea would be pretty high on that list of countries I wouldn't work in, yeah.
But everyone's got a price, right? Like if you were the official commentator for the North Korean highest league, on-site, everything you need, amazing financial package, go back to the UK as much as you want.
Yeah, I still don't think I'd do it, man.
You don't think you'd do it? Is that the way that John Duran thought he probably wouldn't go to Saudi Arabia, but, you know, you put enough zeros at the end? And Saudi Arabia's not the same as North Korea, obviously, but...
I was going to say, careful what you say, because I still want that PIF money to start coming in to Not Another Sports Pod as quickly as possible.
Would you commentate in Russia?
I mean, I've commentated on Russian football for the Russian Premier League World Feed, but I don't think I would go to Russia, no. Unless it was maybe for a major tournament, like the World Cup was. But even then, everybody has a price, obviously. And
China?
There's...
Anyway, we're wandering off here, and I don't want to.
We're just gonna. This is gonna be name the country. Dave just names a country, and I say whether I'm working. That might be the worst podcast we've ever done if we go down that route.
Let's go to the FA Cup then, Mr. Wilson. And okay, Ollie, I've got a question for you at the start of the FA Cup. It was the FA Cup over the weekend. So let me ask you this, Ollie: what do Brighton and Hove Albion, with a 123-year history, Fulham with a 146-year history, and Bournemouth with a 126-year history have in common? So those three clubs are in the last 8 of the FA Cup. What do all three clubs have in common?
They're all making their first quarter-final appearance in the competition?
No. None of those three clubs, despite having a crazy amount of history between them, none of them have ever won a major trophy. And I did some digging on this. Yes, some of them have won like the second tier, what's now called the Championship. I'm not counting that as a major trophy. I'm sure if you dug deep enough, Fulham won a Inter-Toto Fairs Reserve Cup in 1926, whatever. But none of those three clubs have won a major trophy. And isn't that exciting, Ollie? If you're a fan of one of those three football clubs who are all doing pretty well in the Premier League, and by the way, all three of those could finish in the top 5 and finish in the Champions League. So you're in a situation now where for one of these three clubs, Brighton, Fulham and Bournemouth, it could be by far and away the greatest season in their history.
Yeah. There's the big old question of Manchester City being there, though, Dave. You mentioned last night when we were talking about what we're going to talk about on what is a bit of a threadbare weekend in terms of great sport to get into, but you mentioned the FA Cup and the rise of perhaps one of these smaller clubs having an opportunity to win it. It's not discredit a side like Bournemouth are obviously pushing for European football, and if you can be in the top 5 in the top league in the country right now, then there's no reason why you can't push for something like an FA Cup or a Carabao Cup trophy that year. But would be a wonderful achievement for them. Manchester City are lingering around like they are. They're just lingering there as like this big doom and gloom cloud over all the really beautiful narratives that you can tell with the sides that are left in this competition. And it just feels inevitable that big club after big club after big club is being chopped away from the FA Cup right now, and City just lurk in the corner going, yeah, we're having a bad season, but we'll probably ruin everybody else's dreams at this point too.
I think we mentioned it last week. I mean, if Manchester City finish in the top 5 in the Premier League and win an FA Cup, for them, that's a bad season. For every other football club in English football, that is a very, very good season. Like, bordering on fantastic season, really. If you offered every single coach in the Premier League, and I include Arne, at the start of the season, you ask Arne Slot, Arteta, Maresca, all these guys, would you take top 5 in a trophy? Absolutely, they would. So, yeah, Manchester City, despite having been widely criticised, and rightly so, because it was some collapse at the start of the season especially, but, I mean, they're favourites now to win the FA Cup. So, what I would say is, if you look at the draw, Ollie, Bournemouth at home against Manchester City, I mean, you'd expect City to beat Bournemouth there, but it's a tough one. And then Brighton home against Forest or Ipswich, they play tonight, Monday night. Fulham home against Palace, Preston North End against Villa. So, yeah, it's an exciting... I mean, there's no giant killings in the FA Cup anymore. So what we're left with is mid-table Premier League sides being the protagonists if you're looking for some kind of upset. But we are where we are.
We got close to a giant killing, albeit not necessarily the one that you'd probably think about with the challenge of Liam Roberts on Jean-Philippe Mateta. I mean, that is one of the ugliest things I've seen in football. And there is a push for him to be banned for longer. I mean, it's just complete disregard for another human. It's so disgusting, and I can't believe there isn't even more uproar about... And Mateta's very lucky, because actually that boot doesn't really catch him right in the face from the Millwall goalkeeper. If you're unaware of it, you should be aware of it. Mateta and the goalkeeper are kind of coming out. It's a 50-50 ball. Roberts puts his foot up to eye level on Mateta with the studs facing out, going straight for his head, basically, in an attempt to try and clear it, in one of the worst attempts that a goalkeeper's made to try and clear a ball since 1982, and Toney Schumacher going through, or Harold Schumacher, sorry, going through Battiston, I think it was, the French player, and basically almost put him in a coma the way he collided with him. I mean, but they are very similar, and forwards coming forward, goalkeepers coming out, and it's a reckless decision. But it was horrendous, and Mateta's very lucky to have come away with just kind of a cut round the ear and a bit of bruising and a bad knock to the head, because it could have been so much worse, man. It was horrendous.
Yeah, it's a really naughty one.
And the reaction of the Millwall fans, you know, I know there's an edge around Millwall and everything like that, but when they were singing something like, you know, he's going to die, like joyously, football's such a great game. And we literally just spoke about how football can be rubbish for 80 minutes and then 10 minutes can change and make you just come away feeling like you've just watched some magical moment in sporting history at all levels of football. But when you see football fans like that in a ground chanting so disgracefully about the health and safety of another player after he has potentially been severely injured, it's absolutely disgusting. Horrible, horrible people.
So what punishment would you want, Ollie?
I mean, I want a ban
Let's say
for the goal.
You're in charge. You're in charge of law enforcement. First of all, what do you give to the goalkeeper? What kind of match ban do you give to the goalkeeper?
Liam Roberts
what do you
gets
do if you catch fans singing "I hope you die"? What can you do about that?
Well, unfortunately, you can't do anything about the fan supporters. You know, we don't do enough to stop worse things being said by supporters in football grounds at the moment, and that's unfortunate because, you know, it's just not worth a steward's fate of going and accosting all of these people that go and say these abhorrent things at football grounds. So unfortunately, you can't do anything about it, except what we should do is be nationally scolding them for reprehensible behaviours. It's that kind of common society needs to come together and say, you are absolutely vile. Oh, it's only a laugh, mate. Well, it's not actually that funny if somebody's almost put in a freaking coma, because potentially that is what could have happened. Worst comes to worst, like Mateta ends up in hospital in a really serious condition with something like that. Liam Roberts has to get 6-7 game ban for me. Reckless endangerment of a fellow professional, complete disregard for the safety of another professional, lack of awareness. And he may say that, you know, he had his eyes on the ball and everything, but your job isn't just about focus fully 100% on the ball. It's one thing that kind of annoys me a bit when you hear about this, oh, it's not a terrible foul because his eyes were looking at the ball, it's not malicious, but it's still a lack of awareness in your surroundings when we're meant to have awareness at all points in our lives. Like, I'm aware that the dishwasher's going in my house right now, which is why there's probably a little bit of a hum on the background of this podcast. Like, it's annoyed me, but, you know, it's just happening. We put the dishwasher on, we've got to clean some dishes kind of thing. You've got awareness of what's going on around you in your back garden out to the left or right. Dave, I'm sure you're aware of some of the cars that are going past your house or whatever. Have a bit of a spatial awareness, and on a football field, it's no different. You know what I mean? Like,
I guess the counter to that, Ollie, is like things are moving slightly quicker on a football pitch than you're sat here in a podcast absorbing via osmosis, like background noise.
Sure, but
look,
for
it's
instance,
a terrible challenge, and
a goalkeeper's
it's a terrible challenge. Obviously, he should be rightfully punished. But when you say, you know, when the replay comes on for everything, this isn't specifically about that challenge, and the pundit will always say, "Oh, it gets worse every time you look at it," and it doesn't. You're just watching it in slow motion. So when people say it gets worse every time you look at it, well, it actually doesn't. It's just you're looking at it in super slow motion. So look, it's a ridiculous, reckless challenge. You should be rightly punished. But I don't know. I've seen some stuff like you should go to prison and stuff like this. I don't know. It's a bad one, obviously.
The prison argument is if you did that in a pub car park, you'd be done for attempted GBH or something like that. So
sure, but you also don't kick a football around in a, you know. I was
going to say that's when the parameters of a sporting event kind of come in and take precedent over that. In the same way, if you do that in a pub car park, you're aiming to kick somebody in the head. If you do that on a football field, you might actually be trying to kick a ball. And I'm not saying that Roberts isn't trying to play a ball or do anything like that. But what I'm saying is, for complete reckless abandon in the way he's acted, there has to be a pretty severe punishment. And it shouldn't be because Mateta's got away with relatively light injuries that the punishment should be lessened. It's completely disgraceful.
Manchester United got knocked out of the FA Cup at home against Fulham, Ollie. Continues to make the case for Marco Silva being the most underrated Premier League manager. But we're obviously going to talk about Ruben Amarim here. Wayne Rooney, who I'm not sure Wayne Rooney is in any position right now to be throwing stones, but he did, and he called Ruben Amarim naive because Manchester United and Ruben Amarim have said that the grand plan is to get back to winning the Premier League. Before we talk about those comments of whether Ruben Amarim is naive or not, one thing that continually seems to come up is that Ruben Amarim is a great communicator. That's what everyone says, right? Yes, the results are terrible, but Ruben Amarim is a great communicator. Ruben Amarim handles himself so well. He speaks so well. I don't really know how you can make any kind of case that Ruben Amarim is a great communicator because whatever he's communicating isn't working, obviously, for the players he's got. And that Man United side, just to give some context, I've talked about this before and not on the sports pod, but if you grew up watching football in the 90s, as we did, it is so unbelievably shocking to see the demise of Manchester United. Like, it's amazing, but it's shocking because this Man United side, Man United as a football club in the 90s were this inevitable, relentless, title-winning, trophy-winning machine. And it went on forever, it felt like, until Ferguson left. They were so insane. So when you watch Man United now, and you look at their team and you're like, well, the only player I'd say is really good is Bruno Fernandes. Apart from that, you're crap. Like,
don't say that to Roy Keane.
I mean, Roy Keane, what Ollie's referring to here, if you haven't seen it, is Roy Keane and Ian Wright having a shouting match on a podcast called The Overlap. Now, Ian Wright was making the point that Bruno Fernandes is actually a decent player and he's trying to carry this Manchester United side. It's not easy for him. And I actually think Ian Wright was making the correct, mature point. And in my opinion, what Roy Keane was doing, Roy Keane said, no, Bruno Fernandes he basically destroyed Bruno Fernandes. And I think he did it, Ollie, not because he believes it, but because there's a lot of eyeballs on that Overlap podcast. And
you think?
Roy Keane knows the more eyeballs, the more clips, the more money in the back pocket. Everything leads back to money. There's a reason that Roy Keane and these pundits say these things. It's not because they believe them. Roy Keane doesn't think Erling Haaland's a League 2 player, like he said last season. Roy Keane doesn't actually think Bruno Fernandes is crap. He's saying it because it's great entertainment. Like, not to lean on politics too much this week, Ollie, but one of the most absurd things I've seen in recent times was Donald Trump just turning to that group of reporters and being like, this is great telly, in the spat with Zelensky. And it's like, that's like, oh my God, do you really think like that's the crux of this is great telly? That's what Roy Keane's thinking. These pundits, they hardly believe a word they say, mate. It's just great optics, it's great telly, it's great clicks. Anyway, we digress slightly. But, well, I mean, do you think Roy Keane really believes that on the Overlap? When he's screaming at Ian Wright, who, by the way, is half a metre away from him. He's literally shouting at him, saying Bruno Fernandes is crap. That's the crux of his argument.
It's a very ugly... It's a very ugly spat where Ian Wright is trying to just make a calm, level-headed point and Roy Keane is losing his mind. And I am so impressed by Ian Wright kind of just keeping calm throughout it. And the other two kind of chip in every so often with like, what about Roy Keane's going ballistic? I think Keane is apoplectic because he knows what it's like to be a leader in that United team, not this United team, but at United. And he knows that what it requires, or he thinks what it requires as it did when he was playing, is a bully. You know, I was chatting with an ex-player this weekend, actually, about this. We kind of joked about it. And he'd been managed and had worked with Roy Keane in the past. And he said, when I turned up for those training sessions, particularly the first one, knowing that Keane was in charge, I was terrified about doing anything wrong. And I worked twice as hard as I'd worked for any other manager because I knew I was going to get an absolute rollicking. And I think we're at a point in world football where that attitude doesn't work with these players anymore. Players don't respond to that rollicking in the same way like our parents were probably like hit with a cane at school. That didn't work for our generation, and now the generation after us doesn't respond to the clip round the ear hole or you know, the bollocking you get from your old man or something like that. Not to give too much into my growing up and the parenting styles that were put on me, but you know what I mean, like that. It's becoming more and more kind of hands-on, lovey-lovey, which is great, obviously, particularly in parenting, but in football as well, I think it's very much more that arm around the shoulder gets more of a response than the rollicking from a manager or anything like that. And I think Keane is a man who is struggling because that very animated and very obvious barking at people on a football field to lead them isn't visible. And I think he only knows that as the way to lead and to drag a team that's not doing very well up by their kind of boot hole, so to speak. And because he can't see that, that's what makes him so angry and frustrated. So I do believe that he doesn't think Bruno Fernandes is a good... And I think actually Keane gets a bit lost in that he should be saying Bruno Fernandes isn't a good leader of that team. As a footballer, he's good, but he's not able to make others better around him, which you want, A, from that position, and B, as a leader at Manchester United. And I think that's kind of the argument that Keane, when he gets so wrapped up in his emotion in that moment, is trying to make more than anything else. Not to be one of those people that's taking what he says and then goes twists it to suit my own viewpoint, which may also be what I'm doing right now. But I think that's what
I think you've nailed that, Ollie. I do think you've nailed it. I think it's very, very difficult for your Roy Keane. Roy Keane is the summit of this. Obviously, Gary Neville and Scholes and lots of other Manchester United pundits do the same thing. But Roy Keane's the absolute summit of this. And it's incredibly difficult to comprehend because when Roy Keane was coming through, certainly you're suggesting his teenage years at least, there was no red carpet, I don't think. There was no massive influx of money. There was no sponsorship. Sure, Roy Keane made a great living out of the game, was on a very healthy wage throughout his career. No question about that. But it's a combination now, I think, of seeing the 18-year-old that's just signed a pro contract, coming out of training in a Bentley. It's that combination and also exactly what you said. You can't... This expands beyond football, by the way. You can no longer bully people in the workplace. Like, it just doesn't work. You know, if it happens in the workplace and you bully someone and someone shouts at you and screams at you from a metre away in the office, Ollie, well, first of all, it just doesn't happen. But second of all, if it does, you're going straight to HR, you're putting it out on Twitter, you're WhatsApping half the team. Whoever did that is in massive, massive trouble. And for better or for worse, I don't know about how that feeds into the hierarchical nature and discipline and behaviour of general society. I'm not sure. But 100% you cannot treat footballers like that. They are loaded beyond belief. They've got an agent, they've got a PR team, they've got a social media account, they've got massive influence. You can't scream and shout. And that is why, actually, not to venture too far into different topics here, but that is why I believe that the authoritarian, shouter, screamer, obsessive era of managers is somewhat over. And we are now going into the Arne Slot. This is the reason why Carlo Ancelotti's been so successful at Real Madrid. Because he obviously is not going to shout at Vinicius Jr. or Jude Bellingham. Obviously, that's not Carlo Ancelotti. It's calm heads, stay calm, you know, don't get too animated on the touchline, just manage the egos. I mean, how much actual coaching even does he do? I'm not doing a disservice to Ancelotti. I'm trying to be complimentary here. But he's literally, these footballers they're so influential, they're so powerful, they're so rich, they're so unbelievably talented. All you're doing is spinning the ego plates with all of them and just calming them down, keeping them on the right track, making sure no one gets upset at each other. And so I think Arne's lots of representation of that. And yeah, Roy Keane, mate, the 90s were a long fucking time ago. It's 2025. The world looks very, 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 very different now. And that's why some of the punditry, I feel... I often wonder whether that whole, you know, the Carragers and the Nevilles, I probably think, Ollie, as top pundits, they've probably only got 5 or 10 years left. In the way that, you know, your Alan Hansons and stuff got phased out of the punditry game.
Yeah,
I don't think it's something you can do forever.
You don't understand the environment that football's played in now. And I think understanding the environment is as key as understanding things like the tactics and whatnot. I actually think we place a lot of discussion on football tactics and overthink a lot of it in our analysis, because everyone's begging for analysis of the game, right? Why did this happen? Why did that happen? And I think we have a lot of people that aren't great at analysing a football game that will make points that are either painfully obvious or they're trying to create an analysis for themselves, when actually understanding the environment that these players are in, I think, is almost more important than anything else. And I think the fact even that a few weeks ago, Dave, we would, you know, and we have done on previous podcasts, talking about Arteta and his crazy things with the pickpockets in the dinner table and all that kind of stuff. And you and I sit here and go, that's ludicrous. That's actually, like, you know, who would respond to that? Because I think we're probably of that generation that would respond more to a Roy Keane type, just grab him by the neck and let's freaking go. And even we don't, like, on reflection, there might be people that are, you know, 14, 18 right now that go, oh yeah, I see what he's saying, Arteta, with these metaphors and what he's trying to do. And we just laugh at it because that's not the kind of generational response that we had to it. Maybe we're getting phased out of being able to talk about football already, and NASP needs to pivot away. And I'm telling you, the Figure Skating Weekly podcast is just a fingertip away if we really want to do it.
We're going to have to hire a 19-year-old intern Ollie, that could do our social media and kind of haul us up on certain things. But I think you make a really salient point. And I think that also if you're 14, 16, 20 years old, Ollie, you're looking at Paul Scholes and you're being like, I think I remember him. You know, the guy's won 11 Premier League titles, but some people look at Paul Scholes now and be like, I don't really know who that was. Anyway, this is kind of roundabout talking about Manchester United and Ruben Amarim. I mean, they went out the FA Cup. I mean, the demise of that football club is unbelievable. 1 billion in debt, Ollie. Do you think that a lot of the criticism with Manchester United, people criticise Bruno Fernandes, Ruben Amorim, Ineos, etc., but essentially, is it just the Glazers? They took over the football club, they stripped it, they got them in 1 billion worth of debt. So anything Ineos are doing now, and I do want to talk about the further job cuts actually at Manchester United, but anything Ineos are doing now, Ollie, it is all because of the decisions that have been made by the Glazers. I mean, Manchester United are 1 billion British pounds in debt. Just for context, Liverpool, for example, are 100 million. So Manchester United are a 10x. Like, that's insane. A 10x in debt of Liverpool. When you think those two clubs 10, 15 years ago were felt pretty level.
Yeah, it undoubtedly comes down to the Glazers. I think we've discussed, even when poor Eric Ten Hag, he probably got a very nice payoff and is doing quite nicely, actually. When he went, we described him as, you're the guy that's been put in charge of steering the Titanic after it's hit the iceberg. Like, you can't do anything. The big bulk of the ship is going in that direction and trending in that way. And all you can do is valiantly pretend that you're steering it in one way or the other. And I think Amarim's
keep the captain's hat on.
Amarim is just the next guy up. You know, Ten Hag has whipped the cap off, realised there might be a lifeboat there filled with money, and has jumped himself into the water and swum for shore. And Amarim's gone, well, I'm second. I'm the next man up. It's got to be me. I can do it. And he might be a great communicator. He might be, you know, a great tactical masterclass mind in football.
He's not.
But whether he is or he isn't, at the moment, he doesn't have a set of players that are consistently producing whatever great tactics he's trying to implement on this side. We've seen fleeting moments of it where you think United, like the goal Bruno Fernandes scores is a wonderful goal. It's great. And if United were
Ruben
creating...
Amorim hasn't done that.
No, but if United were creating consistently passing moves like that, you'd go, well, they are trying something. But it's not. It's few and far between those moments, those brief moments where you think, oh, that's a cracking bit of football from their side.
I feel that Premier League year, Ollie, they're in a relegation battle. You know, it's just because those three clubs in the Premier League and the bottom three in the Premier League are so poor that they're not. In a different year, they are. I'm not saying they're going down, but they're 4-6 points off the relegation zone as opposed to the 12-13 they are at the moment. I
also think great communicator is a bit like, we've all got mates, for instance, that are really nice people, but like maybe not the best looking bloke or something like that. And you go, yeah, but he's a good guy. Great communicator is like the managerial version of that. Like, you know what? He's a great communicator. He's not getting everything right in his life right now. You know, there's not much going for him, but he's a great communicator. It just feels like a fobbing off, like, ambiguous positive thing to say about somebody you're trying to like or show in the best light possible. And that's what I think we're seeing with Ruben Amorim. I mean, I'm not out on him at all. We spoke about players leaving United. No, what have you seen that makes you think you're in on him? Because I'm not saying... You've jumped in before I've made my point here, Dave. That's the trouble.
Well, that's that's the whole podcast, Ollie. Ollie talks just as picking up steam, wins at times.
I'm not out on him as a manager. I just think you're screwed if you're at Manchester United. You are so screwed at trying to build a team. How can you build a team when everything above you in terms of the hierarchy of the business of the club is all about stripping everything back as much as possible? Like, we're hearing that. Look, don't get me wrong. I thought it was great that United offered their staff canteen lunches for free every day. Like that's unbelievable. There's no jobs that have that. But now they're getting like a bowl of soup and a piece of bread, and including coaching staff apparently. And now it's only first team players that actually get a meal, for instance, at Carrington at the training ground and stuff like that. And it's just everything, every little piece of the pie is just being slivered down and down and down. It's the footballing equivalent of Cadbury's celebrations or whatever the brand is, Nestle or whoever, where 10 years ago you used to have 120 in a big bag of them, and now you get 72, but it's sold at the same price. I mean, it's just slowly stripping back, where each day we don't notice it, but now you're suddenly going, hang on, 15 years ago, this place was the dog's bollocks, and Now it's a crumbling catastrophe, and that's
you
why I'm
could
not
be
out on
referring to
Amarim.
the UK with that. And,
Yeah.
Ollie, let me genuine question. Should Marcus Rashford be initiating a scheme and a campaign against the government to put food back on the table for the Manchester United staff? He did it for the kids. So why hasn't Marcus Rashford stepped up and campaigned to the government to reinstate the chicken and chips or whatever the Man United deputy media manager got at lunchtime, as opposed to the soup and bread that he's getting now? You know, where's the campaign?
Big fan of soup, by the way. I'm a big fan of soup.
Loves,
Soup and
also,
bread is lovely.
when I heard that all those Man United staff are only getting soup and bread, two things popped into my head, Ollie. The first one, as you said, not many companies, some do, but not many companies, certainly not many British companies, are offering free lunch. That's a very American, I work at Meta on 340 grand a year type thing. Keep these people in the office as much as possible. You've got a gym on site and your therapist and your HR. That's an American thing, or it's certainly an extremely high-end British company. So it's quite rare that a British company would do that. So I don't have that much sympathy if your workplace isn't offering a free lunch. But what I will say is a good soup can be fantastic. This time of year, Ollie, a little leek and potato soup with a nice bit of sourdough bread. So I don't want to criticise that move until I've really seen the details, because, mate, a lovely hearty soup in Manchester on a cold day.
I don't want to bring it back to golf, as I always do, David, but over the winter months at the halfway house at the golf club that I play at a lot, they offer a homemade soup, different type of soup every single day, fresh made, handmade, broccoli and Stilton. Don't even get the bread. It's like £2 for a little cup of it, but it is so good as a little winter warmer. A little bit of broccoli and Stilton or a bit of minestrone or something like that. I mean, it's lovely. So if it's a good soup, but I'm imagining Ineos are, your lower than Heinz tomato soup out of the can, big bulk Kirkland from Costco style tomato soup, which again, they don't do terrible products, Kirkland. They're not bad, but it's not going to be great soup.
Maybe I'm a snob. I've never even heard of that brand, Mr. Wilson.
But to the point on this whole United thing, it's just, it all falls on the Glazers. You cannot strip away from a football club or any business and expect it then to run as well as it did when you were investing a lot of money into it. And this is happening, as we touched on, I think, last week, every level of sport, whether you're talking about running clubs as a business, whether you're talking about the way that media rights are being sold now to the highest bidder with the lowest amount of cost being implemented, which means that everybody in producing, cameramen, producers, teams, staff, is cut back to bare minimum time and time again. And it's why we're looking at sport in general and we're viewing it as, well, I don't like the club. You've got Chelsea fans, Tottenham fans, Manchester United fans, all protesting their ownership because it's being run as a business rather than as a football club, where the value is based on the profits rather than based on success on a football field, winning titles and being in the Premier League.
And by the way, what's unusual about this, in my opinion, and obviously Ollie and I work within the industry, but this should be the golden age of sports broadcasting, because it is. There's more football and sport on telly than ever before, or more available platforms. There's more people in the world watching sport than ever before. This should be, Ollie, the gold rush. And yet, inside sports media, what's happened is it's just got stripped and sport. Sports clubs in general, it's just got stripped and stripped. Let's move on, Ollie, because we had a good rant about this last week. So let's move on to other things. I just want to talk about La Liga briefly. Best title race in Europe by an absolute mile. Real Madrid were beaten away at Real Betis this week. Barcelona top of the table by Atletico to Atletico Madrid by a point. And I just want to. I talked about Diego Simeone on another pod, and I'm not gonna rant about this too much, but I do want to say that Atletico Madrid are still on for the treble, and I think that Diego Simeone's contract is coming to an end in the next 18 months or so. I do think he will be and should be the most in-demand coach in European football in the coming years. But one thing that you hear a lot about Premier League clubs now, Ollie, is there's no strikers. Arsenal need a striker. There's no strikers. Chelsea would like a number 9. There's no strikers. Liverpool would probably want one. There's no strikers. There's no strikers. Well, there actually was a striker available called Julian Alvarez, and won the World Cup with Argentina, was massively successful with Manchester City. He's basically 1 in 3 his entire career, so he's not that Alexander Isak or Mo Salah stats, but he's a very, very, very good centre forward that is capable also of playing in other positions. So Julian Alvarez was available. Manchester City should never have sold him, first of all. But they did. They sold him for 80 million to Atletico Madrid. He's been fantastic for Atletico Madrid. Scored the winner at the weekend. As I say, Atletico Madrid are now fighting on 3 fronts. So I'm not entirely sure I have that much sympathy when people say there's no strikers, because Julian Alvarez is a striker and he was available. You would have had to pay 80 million quid, possibly more, because Manchester City might not have wanted to sell to another Premier League club. I get that. But he was available and no one went for him in England that we know of. And so he's ended up at Atletico Madrid and he's doing fantastically well. So yeah, I think it's an odd one that he just kind of went. Do you think it was that Manchester City would never have sold to an Arsenal or a Chelsea or Liverpool?
Probably. I don't think the smartest thing you do is you don't sell to your rivals in the same way. The best thing you can do is what United used to do under Fergie, which was you always buy from your rivals and strip away their biggest asset. Or even in coaching, you take away what a team does best. That's the first part of your game plan of taking on a different side. There are centre forwards all over the place. I mean, a name that I wanted to bring up to you later on in podcast is Ivan Toney. He was lingering around English football and waiting for a move for a big club, and for whatever reason, obviously his personal decision took him to Saudi Arabia. But if one of these big sides, I truly believe, if a big side comes in and offers you the money that you're desiring, that isn't necessarily Saudi level money or whatever, we're talking about Alexander Isak. There was a report in the Telegraph how it's going to cost Liverpool at least 120 million. So David Windsor is big spot on again with his valuation of the Newcastle centre forward. And so there are forwards about if you want to pay the money and if you're willing to invest. And I think Alvarez is just one of those ones where it was on the back edge at City, and so people didn't think it would be worth spending 80 million on somebody that actually we haven't seen have consistent, regular first-team football at a top level for quite a long period of time. That's no real fault of his own. Unfortunately, City got Erling Haaland, and he's the best Premier League forward that we've probably ever seen in terms of goal scoring. You're not going to knock him out of a starting 11. But at least Atletico Madrid have gone, well, look, we have to stay with the times of football. We have to pay big money to bring in good players, and we've seen enough to think that this guy's a good player, and we can make him succeed in the style of football that we have. And one of the best things Atletico Madrid have done over the years since Fernando Torres is have pretty much consistent rotation of differing styles of centre forward that have all been given service or the room to operate in and provide goals. It's one of the best things that Diego Simeone's done at that football club, and one of the best things that football club has done consistently during this tenure. It's incredible, and they've just gone, right, well, he fits what we need and what we want right now, and we're going to have a goal-scoring centre forward again.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at Atletico Madrid's forwards down the years, you're right to point it out. Torres, Aguero, Griezmann, Alvarez, it's just an incredible
Diego Costa. Line. I mean, it was
Diego
always
Costa.
They just brought somebody through just before they got rid of somebody. And Griezmann obviously has gone away and come back and away and come back again, but they've had 5 or 6 now great centre forwards that have just been on a steady stream all the way through. It's fantastic. And everyone talks about their defensive fortitude, and Simeone kind of built the anti-Barcelona side. But they score goals. They always have done under Simeone.
And you know what? Because I said to a Tottenham fan the other day, oh, you should take Diego Simeone when Postecoglou eventually goes. And they were like, oh, he's too defensive for us. He's too defensive for us. And I remember thinking, well, I mean, yeah. I don't know.
You're screaming the lack of defensive football.
It is unbelievable. I think that person might actually be listening to this pod. So, man, let's not be too snobby. I get it. Everyone wants to play beautiful football. But Diego Simeone, I mean, it's since 2012, Ollie. Atletico Madrid have finished third, first, third, second, third, first, third, fourth. And that is in a league with Barcelona and Real Madrid and other football clubs with more money than them. And he's won La Liga titles. He's reached 2 Champions League finals, 1 Europa League. As I say, they're on for the treble this year. Also, for a manager that plays boring football, they played out a 4-4 Copa del Rey semi-final first leg against Barcelona a week ago. So there's entertainment there when you've got Simeone on the touchline, living and breathing every second and orchestrating the crowd. It's entertaining stuff. I mean, yeah.
You know what's ludicrous is Simeone gets tarnished with the defensive football mind. But you know what happens? Is people only watch Atletico Madrid when they play Real Madrid or when they play Barcelona. Do you think Diego Simeone's dumb enough to go, oh, you're a great attacking side, we're going to try and go toe-to-toe with you? No, I mean, the best maneuver from a manager is to be able to tactically change to suit your opponent. Like I said just a moment ago, you take away their biggest asset. For against Barca, it was always, I'm going to smother the 18-yard box and we're going to hit you on the counter-attack because you've got no height to whip a ball in from the flanks and you want to play tiki-taka football around and we're just not going to give you that space. But they don't approach playing Sevilla, Athletic Club, Betis in that same manner. But because people only pay attention when it's the big game or whatever, Simeone's been given this brush of, they're miserable football, it's all defensive. It's like, no, it's not. It's just tactically astute. You've got to laud that. And to a Tottenham fan who has probably been sat there all season going, we've got no defence, it's bloody rubbish. Well, what about this guy?
We need every list that we can. We need every list that we can get on Not Another Sports Pod. So let's.
Oh no, they can come at me if they want. I'm fine. I'm boosting the interactions, Dave. I'm going Roy Keane at this point. You want clicks and whatnot. This Tottenham fans are muppet, and that's putting it nicely. I want defensive football, and Postecoglou's leaves us too open and exposed. Shall we bring in a defensive-minded manager? Whoa! Let's not do that.
Can you see him at a Tottenham, a Chelsea, a Man United?
Doesn't survive a second in the Premier League, I think, Simeone has... We're talking about managers and that attitude of leaders that are more kind of old school. And Simeone still fits into that bracket of old school. I think you were perfect in your discussion of Ancelotti just a moment ago of how he's learnt to adapt to the modern new footballer. And if you read his books, he's very much got this like, I love my food more than I love my football. I put my arm around them and we have a steak and we talk about things. Simeone isn't that guy. Simeone, what you see on the touchline is very much, from the sounds of it, what you get with Diego Simeone. You can only do that at this point at a club where you have that established legacy, Atletico Madrid, where a new player comes in and everybody in that dressing room goes, it's always the way that he's done it. In the same way, nobody could be Sir Alex Ferguson, not to put them on a similar pedestal, but no one could walk into Manchester United after Sir Alex Ferguson and do the same sort of boots across the dressing room, hairdryer effect, because everyone goes, you're just trying to be Sir Alex. And I don't think Simeone can go to, say, a Tottenham and have the attitude that he's got at Atletico Madrid, because Tottenham is too far gone in the modern footballer way. It wouldn't happen at Arsenal, etc. And I think Simeone would have to adapt, and I don't think he's a manager that would necessarily want to adapt in the way he approaches it, because he's had a system and a style of management that has worked for, over a decade now. And just why would you leave? Why would you leave a place where you're so revered, your way works, and this is the way, when you're having still so much success and you're competing at every level in football?
Let's move on and talk about the midweek games before we talk about the potential rule changes to the sport. Yeah, go for Ollie.
Can we just talk about Ivan Toney?
Yes, yeah.
He had a hat-trick on the weekend.
I thought you're not interested when he goes to Saudi.
I'm not.
You said that you gave a great speech about that on the pod a few weeks back.
12 goals in 7 games is a pretty strong record for a centre-forward that has at the moment in the Saudi Pro League 16 goals in 20 games and is scoring in their Champions League consistently as well. And this was all brought to my attention from a article I was reading in the paper this morning about Ivan Toney. Should he be considered an England call-up when he's banging in this level of goals, albeit in a lesser league? But he's quite clearly showing that the finishing ability is still there. So is it a bit like, if a tree falls in a forest and no one's there to hear it, does it make a sound? If Ivan Toney's banging in goals in Saudi Arabia and there's no one there to see it, does he deserve an England call-up?
Well, if you're Thomas Tuchel, how many strikers do you want in that squad? 3. How many number 9s, probably, are you taking to the World Cup in 2026? You're taking Harry Kane, aren't you? Pretty much no matter what he does the next 18 months. Tuchel loves him. He loved him at Bayern. Kane's going to keep scoring goals for Bayern Munich until the World Cup. He's obviously not going to leave, I don't think, until after that World Cup. So you're taking Harry Kane. And then I think it's a dogfight, really, between about 5 or 6 others. Look, with the Ivan Toney thing, I know... people now, and I see this about John Duran, I saw a clip on John Duran, everyone's saying that, oh, you don't understand. It's about generational wealth, and they have to build this wealth for their families and all of this kind of stuff. You can build generational wealth on a Premier League wage. Like, I think there's a massive difference between someone going working Starbucks to earning hundreds of thousands of pounds a year to you're already on a Premier League wage. Like, you're already there. You made it. You have all the money that you and your family could ever want, unless you're an absolute gambling addict and an idiot. So moving to Saudi for the money, I don't know. Everyone's free. It's a free world. You can do what you want. Should he be in the England squad? No, because he should be up front for Arsenal in the midst of a title race, Ollie. That's what he should have done. He should have said, I want to go to Arsenal, be your number 9. And, you know, he should be doing that. And I think there's better forwards. Like, there's better forwards. I think it's Harry Kane. But who would you take to the World Cup? You're Thomas Tuchel. When I say there's better forwards, ... I'm suddenly thinking, are there? Are there better forwards?
Not with that goal scoring record at the moment. I mean, again, even if Ivan Toney actually was obviously great in English football. He scored his first 16 goals in the Premier League in 40 games. So he's done in Saudi Arabia what he did in the Premier League in half the time, basically. He had 17
Chris Wood
and
has
40.
scored 18 Premier League goals this season.
But are you taking Chris Wood? I mean, are you taking Chris Wood to a World Cup for England? Is Chris Wood not doing the kind of Grant Holt, so to speak, the one I always bring it back to, of he's in a system that's working perfectly for him, but actually I think if you put Chris Wood in any other Premier League side, he's not scoring as many goals?
I mean, I think if Chris Wood gets anything close to the 18 he's got this season, I mean, next season's the season, right? Next season is the season before the World Cup. That's where you impress Thomas Tuchel. And I don't know. I think... you take it, Ivan Toney. I mean, Ivan Toney's obviously going to score a lot of goals until the World Cup. He was obviously going to score lots of goals in Saudi Arabia. He's too good for that league. He's in his absolute prime. I'm not going to say he shouldn't be there, but I personally wouldn't take him, because I think in going there for me, in Ivan Toney going to Saudi Arabia, you are saying on some level playing for England is not that important for me. You are saying that.
You're definitely taking Ollie Watkins along with Harry Kane. So you've maybe got one other spot to fill, I would have thought. So when you look at the centre forwards right now in English football in the Premier League, Chris Wood, 18 goals, 33 years of age. Is he even going to be there at 34 for a World Cup? You know, that's a big question mark. Keep going down the line. You got Cole Palmer, who's not a centre forward, on 14 in the Premier League so far this season. Not going to be there. Liam Delap at Ipswich with 10 goals. Now, if we're talking about goal scoring centre forwards, you're not taking Liam Delap ahead of Ivan Toney. Whether Ivan Toney's having a good year or a bad year, I think, in Saudi Arabian football. But the fact that he is continuing to score goals, it just becomes an interesting discussion point when you think about, we're not blessed with a huge number of English out-and-out centre forwards. Yet we have to play with an out-and-out centre forward, at least one, because we've got Harry Kane in the back pocket out in the Bundesliga. But after that, I'm not sure who else you're taking ahead of a guy that is banging them in for fun. And at the end of the day, also, being a centre forward is a lot about confidence. And if you're scoring goals for fun, albeit in a lesser league, there's still some kind of confidence discussions that, well, he's just going to feel like he's still got the Midas touch.
He makes some great points. I think you also need to remember that the way Tuchel's going to play is that if you're that third choice centre forward, you ain't playing. Like, you're training, you're part of the training gap. You're not playing any minutes. Like, you might be thrown on in the quarterfinal when we're 2-1 down. Obviously, that is what's going to happen, because it has happened at every tournament. So you'll get a few minutes at the end of that quarterfinal against Croatia or something when we go out. We know what's going to happen. It's barely worth watching the World Cup. But I think you're taking Harry Kane, who, by the way, I mean, everything depends on next season, but I think you're taking Harry Kane, Watkins, +1, as you say, and then that's up for grabs. I mean, you know, I don't
Danny
know.
Welbeck, Jamie Vardy,
25 goals next year, Ollie. You don't know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah. Just it's interesting. When we've seen so many players go to Saudi Arabian football, and this is the other thing, we've seen so many of them go to Saudi. Like we were touching on, Neymar's had his injury problems, but he played like 16 games in Saudi Arabia in 3 years or something like that, and going now off to Santos with his helicopter. And players have gone there and just fallen by the wayside, either not enjoyed it, not delivered, not produced to the same standards or anything like that. I think you can at least look at Ivan Toney and say, you've gone to Saudi Arabia and you have scored enough goals at this point that it's worth people in the UK going, hey, should we check back in with Ivan? And I'm not saying that should be lauded. That's your job. You're meant to go there, score goals and play football. But the fact that he's actually gone there and has continued to produce, as opposed to just sitting in and raking in the money, unless he's on a great goal bonus, that would definitely lead to why he's banging in so many goals. If he's getting an extra 10, 15 grand a goal, that works out perfectly. So, yeah, it's just an interesting one to keep an eye on because we're not blessed with that many centre forwards. And unless you want to start them playing false number 9s with Cole Palmer, etc., if Harry Kane gets injured, if Harry Kane breaks his leg start of next season, or even next Christmas or something like that, up a creek without a paddle in terms of your centre forward because you're taking Ollie Watkins, Ivan Toney, and some other guy at this point.
Yeah, really interesting one. Really interesting one. All right, let's just preview briefly the midweek games in the Champions League. Ollie. I mean, I guess the Champions League draw is intriguing because you've got that Real Madrid against Atletico Madrid derby in the last 16. You've also got the Bayern Munich Bayer Leverkusen contest as well. I mean, some interesting ties in there. I think that those two obviously are going to jump off the page. I mean, do you still make Real Madrid favourites to win the whole thing? Got to be, don't they?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's just a great footballing side at this point. The fact they've been drawn against Atletico Madrid, it's that better the devil you know. And I think that'll probably be the toughest task that they face out of the majority of those sides left in the competition. But I actually look at the Champions League draw. Who would scare Real Madrid outside of Liverpool, Barca and Atleti? I don't think there are many other. PSV, no. Arsenal, I don't really think so.
And I actually think, Ollie, if Real Madrid in the final are always favourites. They're always favourites and they'll fancy themselves against anyone. But if you look at the Real Madrid draw to win it, right? They knocked out Manchester City. Okay, Manchester City have had big problems this season, but they knocked out Manchester City. Now they've got a Madrid derby, probably like the worst draw they could get, really, when they're in a La Liga title race with them anyway. Whatever happens against that Atletico side, you know it's going to be two exceptionally tough games that are going to be decided by a single goal, probably. You get through that, and I wanted to talk about Arsenal this week, actually, because they're away at PSV Eindhoven in midweek, and I actually think it's just such a big game for Arteta. I really do. I think that if somehow they can get through those two legs against PSV, they can get to that March international break still in the Champions League. By all reports suggest that Martinelli and Saka are back in early April after the March international break. I suddenly think then you're Arteta and you're thinking, okay, we're in the quarterfinals of the Champions League. Players are coming back thick and fast. You know, I can do something special this season. So massive, massive week for Arsenal. To the point where Arsenal, they go away to PSV in the first leg. Then they play Man United at the weekend. And if I'm Arteta, I'm tempted to rest players. I'm actually tempted to rest players against Man United because the title's 99% gone. And I think if you rest players there, you can have everyone fully fit for the second leg. So I digress slightly. But yeah, Real Madrid would then have to go and probably play Arsenal in the quarterfinals, an Arsenal side that would have Saka and Martinelli and one or two others back. Then a potential semi against Liverpool maybe, and then a final against Barcelona. I mean, the path for Real Madrid to win it this year is as tough as any.
Yeah, well, I still don't think Arsenal get as close to taking on this Real Madrid side and still have to get through PSV. I mean, it would be fantastically Arsenal-esque if they didn't get past PSV for whatever reason. You know, you always get that storyline, and that could potentially be the one that comes up this week in terms of a shock. Not to do PSV any discredit and Dutch football any discredit, but I don't think many people have been focusing too much on PSV over the last 6 years in terms of how the Dutch league's going. But yeah, I haven't seen enough from Bayer Leverkusen. Bayern Munich are obviously always going to be a very difficult side. Inter aren't quite the same, I think, as previous years. Italian football's had a big slump in the last 12 months, unfortunately. Feyenoord, no. Benfica, no. Dortmund, Lille. Some of this feels like there's still just quite a few teams that are making up the numbers. Do you remember when, like, the Champions League, you looked at it, particularly like the quarterfinal stage, and you went, that is without a doubt the best 8 teams in European football?
Yeah, but it'll be like that this year, Ollie. The last 16 is always a bit of extra fluff, I think.
True.
I think when you get down to the last 8, I think it's quality. Let's look at the Europa League as well.
When we get PSV, Real Madrid, PSG, Club Brugge, Benfica, Lille, Leverkusen, and Feyenoord in the quarterfinals, we'll recircle back to this. Find the clip.
In the Europa League, I mean, if you haven't looked at the Europa League at all, one thing that's very interesting is the favourites to win the Europa League this year are Tottenham. Tottenham are actually favourites. Bear in mind how bad they've been, really, Ollie, throughout the season. They're actually favourites. Then you've got Athletic Club, which is Athletic Bilbao. And then Man United are third favourites to win the Europa League. That is unbelievable. Just shows the scarcity of quality in the Europa League. Yeah, I mean, Man United against Real Sociedad in midweek, another big one for Ruben Amarim. Or is it just who cares? Lose 5-0. This season's just a write-off. Don't get relegated. Try and sort out the absolute mess in the summer. I mean, does it matter? Real Sociedad in the Europa League? I mean, you're not winning the Europa League. Surely you're not winning the Europa League.
He's in next year anyway, Amarim. So it's,
yeah,
you're just riding out this season, hoping to avoid as many negative headlines as possible. I actually think the liveliest one's Fenerbahce against Rangers. That's that in terms of an atmosphere is going to be
Mourinho, and I tell you what,
that
is
and
very lively.
Athletic
Roma
Club against
Athletic Club
Roma
should be fun as well. Yeah,
there's some half decent ties in there, and then the Conference League. I mean, it's Chelsea's name's on the cup already.
Yeah,
isn't it?
I haven't even looked at it, Ollie. I haven't even looked at it. Do I know? Have I heard of the club Chelsea are playing in the last 16?
Yeah, definitely.
Who is it?
FC Copenhagen.
Okay, yeah, there we go.
But Betis against
in those group
Guimaraes.
stages, there was quite a few that were like you'd never heard of them.
Jagiellonia against Cercle Brugge. Celje, excuse me, the Slovenian side. Lugano, Panathinaikos against Fiorentina. FC Copenhagen against Chelsea. Mulder against Legia Warsaw. Paphos against Djurgården. Borac Banja Luka against SK Rapid Vienna. I mean, yeah.
Let me ask you, Ollie.
Do we need this tournament?
Let me ask you. If Maresca finishes outside the top 5 and wins the Conference League, does he still keep his job? If Chelsea finish 6th and win the Conference League, does he keep his job?
Yeah, probably. European trophies. Hard to sack a manager. It wouldn't be out of the realms of possibility. Todd Bowley's more worried about his ticket prices. So it's fine. There's some silverware coming in and keep the supporters relatively happy, which he's kind of lost the majority of them anyway. I mean, the protests outside Stamford Bridge. It is weird at this point where we are in the world right now that we're seeing protests to like bring back Roman Abramovich, the Russian oligarch. Like, I mean, over Todd Bowley. Ticket prices are the real problem. Forget what he's done in the past. No, but he made the club great again. I mean,
it's a fuzzy world where Chelsea fans are singing Roman Abramovich. Like it's an unusual world, like where the moral compass swings and who's done what wrong. And we were talking at the start of the pod, where would you work? And I only raised that question of where would you work around the world because I just think so much is just this mad, weird, grey area of morality that I don't really know what's.
Make Chelsea great again, mate. It used to be great. It's not anymore. Make Chelsea great again.
Yeah, I mean, it's who knows? What else did I want to talk about? Rule changes in the sport. Now, one thing that is coming in is if a goalkeeper holds the ball for more than 8 seconds, a corner kick will be given for the opposition side. That is a rule that has been trialled in, I believe, the Maltese Amateur League and the Italian youth divisions and 1 or 2 other places. And that is being implemented, I believe, from next year. So if a goalkeeper holds it for 9 seconds, a corner kick's going to be given for the opposition side. Now, the referee's going to count down with his hand from 5. I don't like changes to the sport. I don't think you tinker with the actual fundamental elements of the sport. I think it's completely unnecessary, this. If the goalkeeper holds it for 9 seconds, just give me a yellow card. I don't... that works as a concept. It's absolutely fine. You stop the... I don't get it. What, a corner kick to the other team? It's just weird. What do you think about it?
Yeah, the punishment doesn't fit the crime. And we have yellow cards shown to goalkeepers for time wasting. When we get into the last 10 minutes, it should just be moved to the whole period of the game. And what happened to the 6-second rule? We had a 6-second rule that everyone used to start counting and go, it's over 6 seconds. And no referee ever had the balls to come up with it. The trouble is we come up with this sort of legislation in football and in sport in general. And then the referees always buckle at some point. They just decide that they're not going to enforce it as rigorously as they were going to. Think about the extra time that we were having at the start of football games after the Qatar World Cup. At the end of games, the Qatar World Cup. We were playing an extra 15, 20 minutes sometimes on top of these games. And everyone went, don't do that, actually. We don't want that. Okay, so we stopped having the correct amount of extra time. Then we had the 6-second rule, which meant to be a booking for goalkeepers. That wasn't vehemently enforced after about 3 matches. I swear that lasted. Didn't happen. We've had the talking back to referees gives you a guaranteed yellow card. That lasted for about 4 games until there were 8 people on a yellow card after one incident. And then suddenly, right, we've got to taper that back because that makes the sport look bad. We've had the kicking the ball away that has definitely been more lenient since Christmas than it was in the first half of this season. We're still seeing the ball kicked away by players foolishly. Referees were moving it if you rolled it, half an oscillation away from where the free kick was meant to be. Now it's, I'll just hack it away. Who cares? Don't worry about it. Don't worry with the yellow card. So none of this falls on the sport. It all falls on the referees. And if they don't have the balls and the guts to enforce it properly, regardless of what happens, your goalkeeper's held it for 8 seconds twice or 9 seconds twice in the game. That's 2 yellow cards. That's a red card. You've just lost your goalkeeper. If you're going to enforce it, you have to enforce it that rigidly. And if they don't, it's just another pointless exercise. And giving a corner, it's so weird. It seems like somebody's kind of thought on the fly around the meeting. You got 8 guys in a room. Guys, we need to really sort out keepers holding on to it. What are we going to do? Well, 6 seconds was maybe a bit short. Yeah, sorry. But they're all on 100,000 each to try and work out this problem. So it's fine. There's still a good amount of money being spent on it. And they're going, right, well, 6 seconds was perhaps too short. 8 is pushing it and feels more cheeky 8 seconds, and 10 seconds would be way too long.
That's a week's work as well.
Yeah. What's the right amount of time? 6.5? How are we going to do 6.5? How's he going to count on his hat? Use his fingers. He can do 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. And then what's the punishment? Bob, your idea. Yellow card. Too harsh. Give him a corner? Ooh. I like it, Andrew. Yeah. I mean, it's like thrown out that...
It would have been like, go away for 2 weeks, go and watch 100 football matches, come back with your ideas, then we'll brainstorm this, we'll have a little focus group here, that's 6 months down the line. I mean, all of this, again, just comes back to money. This would be just because... It's like VAR. It's just an additional layer of cash and jobs.
And are we going to have like VAR reviews now to see if the guys held it for too long or whatever? I mean, I know... It's clear and obvious, but everything isn't clear and obvious. It's being reviewed, obviously, so we've already gone past that point with VAR. So are there then going to be protests that a goalkeeper's held it for 8.5 seconds? Imagine you're in the last minute of stoppage time, Dave. Liverpool are trailing 2-1 in a Champions League final, and the goalkeeper holds it for 8.5 to 9 seconds, and the corner isn't given. And a corner at that point, if you're trailing 2-1 with 10 seconds to go, is a big deal. It might be the last chance you get, and it's a clear-cut opportunity to put it in the danger zone. There is going to be players going up to an official going, fucking hell, look at the time, VAR it. And actually, VAR should step in at that point because it's a pivotal moment in a game that's taking place around a penalty area. To me, if you're going to have this, then you've got to enforce it properly. And if VAR needs to be used, great. But then we're just getting into more stoppages. I mean... Yeah, not to go down the VAR route. It set me off. But I was listening to a commentary this weekend on the FA Cup on the Brighton Newcastle game, and goal goes in, and Sam Matterface is like, "Well, he can celebrate, but we're going to have to look at it." And it's like, "Oh, yeah, we do." Even the commentators are kind of like taking the edge off their goal call.
Celebrating very soon, and new gen of players will come through, and they won't celebrate until it's given after the VAR check. Gerard Piqué, who's always got lots to say about the sport. He wants to introduce this rule, Ollie. If a game finishes 0-0, both sides get 0 points. So if a game finishes 0-0, instead of getting 1 point, both sides get 0 points. And obviously, the concept and the idea behind that is that if it's 0-0 with 10 minutes to play, then both sides go gung-ho to try to get the winning goal to avoid the game finishing 0-0 and getting 0 points. So a 0-0 draw is the same as losing 1-0, essentially. You don't get any points.
Stop trying to put football.
And most of our listeners are audio listeners, but I do encourage you to log on to our YouTube channel and just look at Ollie's sunken expression, head in hands, game's gone. So I take it, Mr. Wilson, you're not a fan of that particular
Just stop
suggestion.
fabricating an urge for attacking football. If you're at the bottom of the Sky Bet Championship, and you're taking on Leeds United at Ellen Road, and you know that point is invaluable in your fight for survival, holding out for a 0-0 draw at Ellen Road is actually something that's impressive when the golf in quality... I get it if it's a group stage game in the Champions League or league phase game in the Champions League or something like that. Yeah, you don't want to see the best sides in the world just settling for a 0-0 that may see them through or anything like that. But there's something impressive about holding out for a 0-0 draw. If you're a rubbish team taking on one of the best attacking sides in the league that you're in, and you should be rewarded for that. Stopping somebody scoring should be as rewarded as scoring a goal. That's why defenders celebrate tackles. That's why goalkeepers celebrate penalty saves. Well, they tend not to, but they're lauded for it. Because if the opposition doesn't score, they can't win a football game. And stopping a side that's supposedly better than you in terms of league standings or in just the football that they play from looking like they're better than you is an impressive thing in football. And for Gerard Piqué, one of the great defensive centre-backs of our time. I mean, he was playing in a very attacking Barcelona side and probably got frustrated that sides sat in on them and, went looking for a 0-0 against Barcelona. But, I'm sorry, but you've got to laud defending. Yeah, it's just ludicrous. Idiot.
Well, we didn't
ex-players shouldn't be allowed to speak as much as they do.
Well, just on the ex-players thing, and not to circle back to Manchester United. Well, I am going to circle back to Manchester United because we didn't actually discuss it. So just because I was looking at front page of BBC Sport and all this stuff, is Wayne Rooney called Ruben Amarim naive? I mean, what do you think about that when you're an ex-player? I mean,
Ruben Amarim calls Wayne Rooney a drunk. I mean, what are we just throwing insults around at each other? It's just if you're a player. You have the ability to talk about what's happening on the pitch for sure, and I definitely think that. But if you're a manager, it's a very different game. I've heard a lot of ex-pros actually say that they get very frustrated, and ex-managers, when they're in commentary jobs and stuff, have said it's very frustrating when a player who's never managed starts talking about... Now, this isn't Wayne Rooney's case, obviously, but considering how much of a failure he's been at in every managerial job so far, I think you can still cast this on him slightly. It's very difficult to understand how difficult it is being a football manager and the decisions that you make both tactically and with player personnel, etc. So I think if you haven't managed, slagging off other managers is a really bold thing to do. In the same way, if I've got a record of being a terrible manager, I wouldn't be throwing stones from that glass house. Would you?
I mean, but Gary Neville was a terrible manager.
David,
if I Valencia, and he's the most prominent pundit in Britain.
If I made constant glaring errors, like I was getting the teams wrong and all this kind of stuff during a commentary, and then I heard Peter Drury slip up on a goal call, and I went, Peter Drury's not a bit naive for making that decision in the moment to try and say that. What a terrible commentator he is. I'd want every single person to point out, let's not be throwing things around too much. Amarim isn't even at the peak of his game, but he's obviously had great success with Sporting Lisbon, and he's just in a terrible United team right now.
Am I allowed to criticise him, though? Because I haven't been involved in the game in that way, so am I allowed to, surely...
Criticise Ruben Amarim?
Because I think Ruben Amarim, I don't think he's... I cannot see any pro case anymore for Ruben Amarim.
I think you're allowed to critique and analyze, have an opinion on it, but when you start removing the context, I think, around it, like I said to you, I still believe he's a good manager. I think he's just in a very difficult situation at Manchester United. You have to have that caveat. And also, we're not in such a public place where everybody's hanging on to our every word or anything like that. Don't get me wrong. No. Love the dedicated listeners of NASP, but what we say is not making headlines on the front page of the BBC. Wayne Rooney might be doing what you're talking about with Roy Keane, might be just saying this for the sake of making an impression and getting his name in the headlines again, and then he gets a few more interviews off the back of it. Yeah, he'll get paid a few grand for having a sit down with the Sun to discuss more about the naivety of Ruben Amarim or something like that.
I mean, more macro as well, mate. He's probably thinking, shit, maybe I'm not a good coach. What am I going to do for the next 40 years? Oh, great, I'm on the BBC or wherever he said this, I'm on telly. Someone asked me about Ruben Amarim. I could say, it's actually a really difficult set of circumstances and he's probably a good coach, but, he's in a difficult position. He could say that, or he could say Ruben Amarim is naive. And he says that, it makes front pages, and then all of a sudden TNT, are contacting his agent saying, oh, Wayne, you're available, can you do the Sunday slot here and there? So, I don't know. It's all linked in. Right, any other business?
I think, Dave, we're allowed to question. And I think that's what we should do as people that don't play, don't manage. We should question. We should say, well, why is that happening? I don't think that's working, but what's the reason behind it? As opposed to just going, well, he's rubbish. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's the way it should be phrased. And for poor managers and people that haven't managed, that's the way it should be as well, more than anything else. Any other business? I think I sent this to you last night.
Yes, it got a criminal was had a redemption arc. Talk us through it, Ollie.
I mean, this is wonderful. Ex-motorcycle gang member is now qualified for the Open Championship at Portrush. Ryan Peake qualifying after winning the New Zealand Open. But he's going to need clearance to travel to Portrush in Ireland in the summer to be able to play in the Open Championship due to previous convictions after, at 21 years of age, the Australian was in an outlawed motorcycle gang called the Rebels. He was given a 5-year prison sentence for serious assault, and now he's used sport to turn his life around. He was apparently like a very good golfer at the youth level. And then as a rookie on the Australasian Tour, he's come from 4 shots back to win the New Zealand Open this weekend, netting him around about £100,000 in prize money. The winner's also earned him a tour card on the Asian Tour, which is very impressive and is a game changer. Obviously changes his life completely in terms of prize money that he'll be able to play for, playing consistently as a professional golfer now. But yeah, he's won a chance to play at the Open Championship this summer, which is, I think it's just nice. We've been curmudgeons on this show a fair bit over the weeks. I think it's good to finish on a positive story about somebody who's used sport to turn their life around after showing that they had the potential to be a great young athlete, have gone down a wrong path, and then have come back and found themselves a way back into the sporting fold once again, changing their life around and giving themselves a chance to play at one of the greatest golf competitions, arguably the greatest golf competition on the planet. I think that's awesome.
5 years in prison for serious assault. Why are we letting criminals into the country, Ollie?
Just like that, the positive atmosphere just sinks back down like a...
Ollie, if it wasn't sport, would you want someone that had served 5 years in prison elsewhere to be coming to the UK? I mean, the whole point of jail, by the way, is to rehabilitate people. And once you've served your time, then you can be rehabilitated into society.
Apparently
Totally
not,
get that.
according to David
They're not
Windsor.
laws against people with convictions. Don't the US have a law where if you've been convicted elsewhere, you can't just wander into the US if you spent 5 years? By the way, this isn't like you stole a pack of Walker's Crisps when you were 17. 5 years in jail for serious assault. I mean, it doesn't sound that nice, does it?
No, it's not. It's not a nice crime at all. It's a terrible crime. But if we're talking about rehabilitation, then hopefully this isn't a... Yeah, well, I got out of jail, I couldn't do anything else, and I've come up with, I can still hit a golf ball and do all that stuff. And he's still a nasty person underneath. I don't know Ryan Peake very well, but I think if the redemption arc is true, and he has turned his life around after going down the wrong path, I think you can only look and see the positives of that.
Should we try and get him on the pod?
Ryan,
he
how badly did you beat that person? That'll be your opening question. What was it?
Ollie, I'm just asking questions here. I don't know the law. Like in the UK, if someone's done 5 years in jail in another country, are they still allowed in the UK? I genuinely don't know the answer to that question. I mean, obviously they are because he's.
Well, they said that they need to sort out kind of arranging travel permits for it and stuff like that. So I think there are going to be complications in trying to get into the country. But if somebody's been rehabilitated, if you had an accountant who's done 7 years in jail or something like that for, I don't know, drug dealing or whatever, right? But they come out, they take their accountancy exams, and they're a great accountant that are going to save you a lot of money on your taxes, Dave. You'd still use that accountant, right?
It's a good question. I think I could find another accountant that hasn't done 7 years in jail. Like, it's not a question of like you don't file your accounts or you have to use this criminal. I don't know, man. It's I don't know. It's an interesting one, certainly.
And over the last few days as well, there was just in golf, Donald Trump was told that the Open will not be returning to his course at Turnberry as it doesn't make enough money, despite political pressures being put on the Open Championship. Apparently, they just can't get the the audience in there. There's not enough space for the supporters that they would like, and it just doesn't make enough money going to Turnberry, which I think is an easy way for the Open to just kind of circumnavigate the whole pressure of taking the greatest tournament in golf to Donald Trump's course, which has held Open championships in the past, but at least for the near future will not be doing so.
What about instead of 5 years for serious assault, someone got 20 years for murder? Would you still think it was fair game, Ollie, that they were playing golf around the world? Or where's the line? Because if you murdered someone, I'm not sure you're allowed. Are you allowed in the UK if you murdered someone in another country?
I don't know. You might be.